Welcome back. In the previous video, we implemented an animation montage so that we could fire the weapon and get a gun firing animation. So we have this, which looks really good when we're standing still, but you might have noticed if you're running and you fire, the animation takes over the whole body. And we'd really like for the legs to continue running while the upper body plays the fire animation. So in this video, we're going to implement blending of animations. So let's go ahead and open up our Shooter Anim BP. Now we have our ground locomotion. This is the pose data for idle and jogging. We've got the jog start, the jogging, and the jog stop animations. And we've cached this pose. So we have this cached pose that we can use. Now we've used the cached pose and run it through a slot for the weapon fire. Now as long as we're using this slot, then whenever we play an animation that's using this slot, namely our hip fire animation, then that animation is going to overtake the pose saved in the cached ground locomotion pose data. And that's why the hip fire animation takes over. So what we're going to do is we're going to blend between the ground locomotion and the ground locomotion fed through the weapon fire slot. So we can actually cache off this, the ground locomotion running through the weapon fire slot, and so we can have two different poses. One that's just the regular ground locomotion, and one that's the ground locomotion running through weapon fire, the slot. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out this ground locomotion feeding into the cached node by highlighting and hitting the C key, and I'm going to say cached ground locomotion. And now for this one, I'm going to go ahead and cache this. I'm going to drag off of the weapon fire slot node, type cache, and say new saved cached pose. And I'm going to rename this by clicking on it and type cached weapon fire. So we can highlight these and comment this and say cached ground locomotion with weapon fire slot. So the more we comment these, the more we can keep things organized and understand just exactly what we're working with. So what we want to do is take the ground locomotion and blend it with the ground locomotion going through the fire slot. And we can do that with a node called layered blend per bone. So right click in the graph and type layered and select layered blend per bone. Now what this does is it has an input for the base pose and an input for blended poses. You can have multiple. And then it's got a float for blended weights depending on how much you'd like it to blend. Now this blends between two poses based on a particular location on the skeleton. In our case, we want to blend in such a way that the hip fire animation is only playing for the top half of the body, and the regular ground locomotion is only playing for the bottom half. So I found the bone here, spine underscore 01, on the skeleton for Bellica, and this is just about halfway up the body. So what we can do is on layered blend per bone, in the details panel, click the drop down next to layer setup. Now layer setup is an array with a single element. Click the drop down for that element and you'll see branch filters. Branch filters is empty, but we can add an element to that. And if we click the drop down next to the element we added to the branch filters array, you'll see that it's got two properties. One is the bone name, the other is the bone depth. Now we're going to select the spine 01 bone for this. And we simply enter the bone name and it's spine underscore 01. And we're going to go ahead and plug in for our base pose our cached ground locomotion. So right click and type cached ground, and we're going to use cached pose ground locomotion for our base pose. For the blend pose, we're going to use the cached weapon fire. So right click and type cached weapon fire and select that one. And so we'll take the output pin for the layered blend per bone and hook that up to the output pose. So let's make a comment around these nodes, and we can say blend between ground locomotion and weapon fire. Go ahead and compile and save this. Now let's test this out. We'll hit play and we can start running, and if we fire, now we'll see that the bottom half of the body is playing the ground locomotion and the top half is playing the hip fire animation. And that's because we're blending between the two based on the spine 01 bone. So we can actually select the bone on the body where we start to play one animation and stop playing the other. Pretty amazing. So this concludes this video. We learned that we can take pose data and feed it into a layered blend per bone node, which allows us to blend between two poses based on a certain bone that we choose. We'll become a lot more familiar with animation techniques in future videos. See you in the next video.